Hello everyone, welcome to another deck profile with me, Chocobilly, and the deck I'm looking at this week is XEX, or 10EX obviously, and as you've probably guessed, it's 10 themed, but with lots of EXs, and it's a rainbow deck as well. Ever since making my Terra deck for the Store Championship in Norwich, I've basically been exclusively running rainbow decks, and they're a lot of fun to do. But yeah, there are some really fun things you can do with this deck. I actually built the deck in Opus 19, but I've made a couple of changes for it in Opus 20. I'm not sure if they're better. Basically, the change is to include the new brother as a forward, rather than having brother as a backup, because now I am limited to 5 backups, 5 unique name backups, which ultimately puts me to 14 backups, whereas before I had at least 2 brother, which meant I was at 16, 6 different backups, so I has a bit more ability to choose what I want. But, Buddy can search any of these things, Walker also gets any of these things. I'll start with the backups, move on to the forwards, and then finally the summons. So yeah, Kimari, I have 3 Kimari because you want to be able to generate different elements, and provided your opponent isn't only exclusively in, earth, water, or wind, you should be able to get something of it as well, so, maybe getting some fire. Really, actually, that's the only thing you'd really want outside of that, but still, it gives you another multi-element forward. Backup, even. Yeah. Len. So, when your opponent casts a summon, activate Len. So, this is a bit of a weird one, but it's a card that never gets played, and I actually really like Len. And I think that could be quite funny when blindsiding your opponent, because let's say your opponent casts a summon. That summon would go on the stack, followed by Len, then resolves, activates. You could then use Len to cast Kuchulain to make it, say, blank forward, or just use it alongside something else. There's all these different things that you could utilize, but ultimately I just really like having that 1 CP as a threat to your opponent. They don't know what's going to happen. Walker. EX Burst. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add a water card or a category 10 card. There are 2 cards in this deck which are not category 10. Kuchulain and Pandemonium. Everything else is 10 themed. So, if you hit 2 Kuchulain and 1 Pandemonium, or 2 Pandemonium, 1 Kuchulain, which is, again, very unlikely, you should be guaranteed to hit something off of Walker. Buddy can search any of the backups, so, you're always going to have something you need. And Riku, because she can play literally everything in this deck other than Kuchulain and Pandemonium on her own. Anyway, moving on to the forwards. So, Gipple. Remember Gipple for game back in Opus 1? So, yeah, he's an EX burst, and that's kind of the point of this deck, is to have EXs that actually are meaningful as well. I also actually kind of prefer this Gipple to the other one, because you need a party attack for that to have an effect. I think it's something stupid like +3 or +5, and everything gains brave within the party as well. But still, being able to just play Gipple onto the field, and everything gains +4, I quite like that as well, personally. Pain. So I've only got 1 Pain. I did in my initial iteration of the deck actually have 2, but ultimately she can search you Yunas or Rikus. It means that she can get your backup as well if you really need to. If you're having to play Pain turn 1 to get your Riku down, she is a multi-element Riku, so, there are worse things that could happen, and it is still a forward to either be able to block with or attack with the following turn. But she can get you Yunas as well, of which there are 3 Yunas, but 2 different unique names, one which has an S as well, so if you've already got this unit onto the field, you could grab another unit to be able to use for the S fodder. Barrel-Eye. It's a one-off, but ultimately, it works nicely with Len. So if your opponent casts a summon and you've got Barrel-Eye on the field, oops, I'm just going to deal 3k to your opponent's board, which I think is stupid but fun. He's a really useful card though, and again, you will need either your opponent to have ice to be able to use Kimari, or be using Riku to be able to play him onto the field to cover the ice. Excuse me. But either way, having stuff like Pandemonium and Valfor in the deck to be able to reactivate your backups, and then also deal additional damage as well, is where this card really lies in its best abilities. Unfortunately with Valfor, there are only 2 Valfor in the deck, and you will need the unit forward on the field, so there aren't any unit backups. So you are kind of in that position where it's less likely to happen, but Pandemonium in and of itself is pretty decent as well, because, Barrel-Eye will deal 3k to the board. Pandemonium, if your opponent's at 5 points of damage, will deal 4k to the board. So with Barrel-Eye, that becomes 7k. And that's not too bad. Ject. Because it's a 10 deck, you're going to be hitting... you play Ject onto the field with all 5 of your backups as well. You're going to be dealing stupid amounts of damage to stuff. And again, it's an EX. And you can put it into the break zone, to search yourself a Tidus as well. Tidus, whatever. I did consider maybe going for Sins instead. But this deck can go wide pretty quickly, so I didn't want to kind of have that card in my hand and be like, I don't want to play it until I'm already at a disadvantage. because, you know, you want to kind of go ham. But yeah, its EX just makes it playable alone, and even if you don't get to search anything through the put into the break zone, just coming onto the field and probably doing 10k something's worth it. Braska, 3 Braskas. There are 12 summons in the deck, and there's 3 Braskas, so you should be able to get his S off quite nicely. You can also Grand Summon if you want to, and, you know, break 2 things, deal opponent damage. It shouldn't be too hard. It's a lot of fun. Lulu, because you've got 12 summons in the deck, and you've got Braska. But not to mention the fact that it works very nicely with, you know, the little 1 CP Ifrit from Opus 11, because that is just an insta-kill on something. Obviously, you need to be paying for that either with Kimari or Riku. But again, or technically from hand as well. But with Lulu on the field, it's just an insta-kill. That's nice. I also really like it with Kuch Lane as well. To be able to set something to 5k and lose its abilities really is just salt-inducing. Is that a thing? Can you say that? I don't know. Saltifying? Yeah, I mean, I don't have to rationalize why Lulu's in the deck. She's ridiculously good, that's why. Aura is a form of protection for your forwards. Simple as. Tidus. So, obviously, his cost gets reduced for each of the 10 forwards you control. There are lots of different 10 forwards. There are 24 forwards in the deck, so 21 outside of himself. So chances are you're going to be able to play him for fairly cheap. And then he can search you a Jekt, a Yuna, or a Walker. And again, it's really useful if you have to play Tidus early to then go get your Walker. Walker's going to hit something, so, you know, worse things have happened. Again, it does suck to have to do that, but if you, say, play an Auron onto the field, immediately followed by Tidus, that's the same cost as just playing Tidus straight up anyway. Well, kind of. If you don't count the Auron that you have to play onto the field, but either way, you get then a Walker, which you could then play if you wanted to. And, oh, yes, he attacks, he deals, or he plus 2k to your board. It's fine. Pain. So I've got obviously one of the Wind Pains, but I wanted to put 2 of these in here as well. Deal 7k something is alright. Multi-element, deal 10k. It's a really nice EX against Warrior of Light because it removes it from the game as well. Well, actually, no, it's not. As an EX, it doesn't work, but as a when you play it onto the field with Warrior of Light, if a damage forward your opponent controls, put from the field into the break zone, remove it from the game instead. Again, that works really, really nicely with Lulu as well, because Ifrit is just an insta-kill. You know, using stuff like Pandemonium as well. If you're able to board wipe your opponent with Pain on the field, all those forwards get removed, and that's pretty gross. And again, another EX. Yuna. So, again, another kind of... There's a bit board wipey, actually, now I think. I've never really analysed the deck to this point where I'm like, oh yeah, loads of board wipes. But yeah, a board wipe, and then a couple of Yunas in the deck to be able to use her S ability if you really, really wanted. I don't think I ever actually used it. It's pretty costly. I know you get to use it twice if you also dull Yuna, but yeah, I think I'd just rather play her onto the field and freeze everything. And then you got the other Yuna as well. So when she enters the field, choose one forward opponent controls. If its cost is equal to or less than the number of category 10 characters you control, put it on the top or bottom of your owner's deck. Again, that should be... You should be able to do that. I'd be very surprised if you played Yuna in a position where you can't do something. And then obviously damage 5. When she enters the field, you may search for a category 10 character of cost 6 or less and play onto the field. Pain, you can play Pain onto the field. So again, if your opponent's got something like Warrior of Light, you play Yuna, damage 5 to then play Pain onto the field to then just remove your opponent's Warrior of Light. That's a big swing in your favor. And then finally, Brother. I said I changed this deck massively because of this card, and then I only put 1 copy of it in, but yeah, I think it's the fact that I've only got 5 unique backups in the deck. I could put more in the deck if I really, really wanted to, but ultimately I have, ever since building my 6 deck, which utilizes the Sky Pirates and Philo and getting that, I've kind of got into this kind of habit now of, if I've got a decent searcher, I'll have 3 of that, I'll have 3 of maybe 2 other backups, and then 2 of that 1 other backup. Put me to 14 backups, and have 5 unique backups, so there will be everything I need. It kind of works in this deck as well. But ultimately, yeah, you play Brother onto the field, you get to reactivate all of your 10 characters. If you had a 10 monster or something, you could utilize that, maybe. I don't know if they've got a dull ability. There aren't really any cards in here, though, that utilize dulling outside of Yuna. So you could play Brother onto the field, and then in response, use Yuna's S ability, and then dull her to then deal AK to 2 different forwards, which would be alright, I guess. And then obviously everything reactivates, and Yuna's there ready to attack potentially as well. There is also the Water Yuna promo, which when you can dull her to do minus 2k to a forward for each forward you control. So with Brother on the field, that would be minus 4k. You play Brother onto the field, In response, dull Una, reactivator, dull again. You've minus AK'd something, which is alright, not too bad. And then finally moving on to the summons. So as I mentioned before, I've only got a couple of Una in the deck, so I've only got a couple of Valfor in the deck. So yeah, it's not as applicable, but with something like Lulu on the field, or in the deck, sorry, being able to play her and get Valfor when you need it, because you then have Una, it's a bit better. You probably could take the Unas out of this deck, to be honest, and put them in the backup lineup, but I wouldn't necessarily play the summon reducing one, because all my summons are basically of one outside of Bahamut, and that one is not not water, sorry, so yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure. Well, you could go for the light forward as well, maybe potentially, but yeah, Valfor being able to reactivate everything with when you've got Una there is nice, and then doing 3k again, that alongside Barreleye, very useful. Cuchulainn being able to blank stuff again, EX, just very important. Ifrit, it's an EX, deal 5k. If your opponent's at 5 points of damage, deal at 8k. This deck likes your opponent to be at a disadvantage because Pandemonium and Ifrit both capitalize on them being at damage 5. And then Pandemonium, again, another EX, gets you a backup back as well, which is nice. And then finally, Bahamut, star of the show, because you can remove 10 fire characters or 10 characters from your break zone to then be able to play or cast Bahamut for only 1 CP, which is pretty good in my opinion. I really, really like it. And that is my 10 EX deck. It's pretty simple. There are some changes that could easily be made, changing up the units for something maybe a bit more stable, so you can use Valfor a bit more, maybe having some more backups in there, maybe if you wanted more brothers, less brothers, I don't know, it's up to you. But yeah, this is my 10 deck, and it did all right, and it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, be lucky, see you in the next video.